Kentucky. That was really cool because like to see people just coming together to help. Like now thinking about the waters, just it was dirty, but I don't know what the hell we were thinking, but we were like, yo, let's like canoe over there. And they had like it was a kayak, whatever, same thing. But like we kayaked over there and like down the street that I would drive on all the time. It was so weird. And then we went into the apartment and the water had gone down significantly. So it was like a foot deep. Like I walked into the apartment and, water was like halfway up my leg. And I saw the water level that had happened and it was like where my chest is. So we just like went through and the house just looked insane. It was so weird because, obviously none of the power worked. So it was like outside of the sunlight, it was kind of dark and the fridge was tipped over. And this was like an old ass fridge. So it was one of those really heavy beast ones, just like things were just all flipped over. The couches and everything were just like everywhere. But it was so weird because like I had this, I don't know, I just had this peace. Like it was so weird, bro. I was like standing in the middle of the house and like looking at all this stuff, and I was just like, damn, I'm not really fazed by this, and I should be. At first, I thought something was wrong with me, and but then I was like, damn, I got my music equipment, and I have like a bag of clothes, which is really like all I need. Um, and I was good with it. It was super weird, like, and I realized I was like, damn, this is like what I really love, because this is all I care about. Like, I don't care about any of this other stuff. Like, I worked at a suit store at the time. So I had all these like really expensive suits that were like just ruined and I didn't even care. And
Hmm.
like, it was just really weird. And I realized because I had been going back and forth in my mind too, um, just like, oh, like, I want to just do music, but like I should go to school. And then I would go to school, like sign up for college, and I would only go for a week, and then I would bail on the rest of the classes, and then have to pay that back. And but I would just never go, and I would just like never go to class. So at that point, when I was like standing in the middle of my apartment, I was like, all right, I'm gonna quit my job. So like the next day I pretty much called and I was like, yo, I'm just not gonna come back. So it just pretty much worked out like that. And it kind of made me release more music, which was cool. I wasn't overthinking it as much because I had to like make money off of it. So I was like, I didn't have time to overthink it, which was a blessing because it allowed it to be more raw and natural. Like I'll go into a session and like people will be like, oh, like let's mix this down more or whatever. And then so I feel like sometimes my label probably hates it because I'll just turn in music and it just sounds to them like unfinished. But to me, I'm just like, I don't want to overthink it. Here you are. Here's like it's raw, but like I feel like people like it. Like Falling was the demo mix. So like that was
Amazing.
the demo mix. We didn't even like I don't something happened. We couldn't like find the final session or one of the sessions. And I retook the vocals like three times, and then I was just like, you know what? Let's just put this demo mix out. It sounds good, and I felt weird about it. It helped me a lot in so many different ways. I know I'm like kind of rambling and going off, but it's just kind of
You know,
how I
I
talk.
no, Trevor, I love it because you and I have something, a lot of things in common. But that I lost my house in Hurricane Irene, and it was
Oh,
un,
dude.
unprecedented. And it was so the house that I normally live in New York City, but I always have a place upstate, and I'd moved
Hmm.
upstate after 2008 when there were so many problems and the event industry was really struggling. And Hurricane Irene is unprecedented because in Vermont and New Hampshire, where like a hurricane never comes because it's so far
Right.
inland, literally, like hundreds of fucking cows were killed on farms, and because there was flooding everywhere. And I had a house that was not far from two ski areas, but it was on a river, and we had my boat out in front of the house on a dock and there it was. We were watching the news. We're like, shit, whatever happened to this hurricane? It never really happened. And I'm calling my friends in New York City, like, oh, we're in Central Park walking around. Everything's fine. I'm like, oh, okay, great. So all my neighbors started opening bottles of wine and champagne. They're like, shit, we made it through. This is great. And then a buddy of mine called me and said, Andy, the tide is about to change. I'm like, what does that mean? Who cares? He's like, well, it's about to go out. And all the runoff from Windham Mountain and Hunter Mountain, the two ski areas north of New York City, they had 14 inches of fucking rain the night before. Where is that rain going to go? Oh, sure enough, boom. You would have thought we lived on the Colorado Rapids. And so there we were. And they clocked the water going 36 miles an hour in front of my house, ripped the dock apart, ripped the boat. Every neighbor lost their dock, lost their boats, lost everything. And then the water just started to creep up. We're like, oh, no, don't worry. It's not. And there's no way it's going to come up to the terrace. Oh, yeah, terrace. Don't worry. It's never going to go over the top step of boom, into the living room. And just like you, it was like waist deep. And that's why I asked, what did you grab? Because I'm like, well, we had managed to get two of my cars up the hill where it was to high level. But I'm like, I don't know where to begin. Like I grabbed my passport and, we carried the two dogs who were big dogs. And I grabbed like some toiletries, a little bit of clothes. And I'm like, that's it. And we literally went across the Hudson River to a town where I, at the time, owned a little hotel. And people are like, you look kind of weird. What's going on? I'm like, do you have any idea what's happening here? I mean, they're like, what are you talking about? And we lost, there were 24 of us who lost our homes in that hurricane. And the water just kept creeping up. And you're just like you're saying. But when I went back, there was just mud. Oh, my God, mud that was all throughout the house. And probably like you, I think it was a life-changing experience for me because even like with COVID right now, and I think you and I are on the same page, it's like, I'm always trying to talk to people about, listen, we just need to be grateful right now. We need to be present and grateful. And I think you have to get to a point in your life where you're like, when is enough, right? Because everybody says like, I need that. I'm going to buy that big mansion. I need that fancy car. I need this. And at the end, you figure out none of that shit makes you happy. And
yeah, exactly.
And what makes you happy? Probably your music, your girlfriend, and, blah, blah, blah. But it's like, Americans have become so materialistic. It's just sort of scary. But you touched, Trevor, on your dad. Was he a big supporter of your music?
Yeah, he was.
You're lucky. That's great.
Yeah,
totally.
For sure.
Because without that, I mean, was he inspiring you too and saying just go for it? Or
yeah, he was, and like.
Do you remember where you were when Falling hit number one after such a long period of time? And do you remember calling your father to tell him?
Oh, I was actually at his house when it happened. Well,
nice.
I was at his house whenever we found out it was number one on Apple, at least. So basically it would be like you'd ask Siri like, hey Siri, what's the number one pop song in the world? And yeah, that was crazy.
Oh my God.
Really
Did
cool.
you start to cry? No.
Yeah, I did a
Yeah.
little bit. So I told my dad, I was just like, yeah, like, hey, ask Siri what the number one pop song in the world is.
That would be pretty cool. I love that. I mean, what is it all about, right, Trevor? And that's why I admire musicians so much. And I've really felt for so much of the community with COVID because everybody's just been locked down and not able to tour, not able to perform. And I'm personally obviously looking forward to getting through COVID as most of the world is, but I'm pretty excited about, being able to host a few really good music festivals again. My goal is to make them as close to zero waste as possible, support local farmers, support social impact groups, find really cool artists that make like sculptures out of plastic water bottles, convince people to stop using plastic and stop littering, but still have great content, but featuring great young people, I think is my dream, and I'm hoping we're going to get there sooner than later, right? I mean, let's get COVID behind us. It's just amazing.
Yeah, I'm just like amazed that it's already been a year, and it's kind of crazy like how far we've come, like really looking at last year when this first started and just how scary everything was. And,
Oh,
you know, it's still scary and everything, but there's a lot more hope when you think about it now. Um, sorry, like
don't-
I live like on Hollywood Boulevard, and it's just always some crazy shit happening.
Trevor,
Um,
don't worry. It's real life. You're living the
yeah,
real life. Yeah,
yeah,
totally. Well,
it's,
on that note though, Trevor, like LA got really, really scary. Speaking of ambulances, like they're like, we're not picking anybody else up anymore. We're not gonna like
yeah,
everybody I know that was, and I would normally spend 50% of my time in LA. And I obviously since COVID, I haven't, I've been in New York, but God, scary shit when they're like, we have nowhere to put dead bodies. We're not picking anybody up. We don't like, listen, to me, it all just sounded surreal completely. I mean, how did it feel to be there?
I mean, at the time, I had a house off of Mulholland, so I was like up in the hills. I would just like hear shit like
Yeah.
happening, you know, like especially when the riots and stuff would like broke out, like after the protests and like there was you know clashes between protesters and the police, and then obviously you know things escalate into riots when that happens. I would just like hear pops and booms and shit, and it just sounded
Uh,
like a little war was going down. And like, you know, the I feel like the news definitely escalates a lot of stuff
yeah.
sometimes, but so we really didn't know what to think. I think that shined light on a lot of things that you know we needed to talk about in this country and stuff too. But on top of that, like with COVID and everything, like I just really couldn't tell exactly what was going on at first. I just like really didn't know the severity of it. And you know, I would see a lot of numbers on the screen and everything, and then when I would come like down to get groceries or whatever, it would just be a ghost town, which is there was no traffic, which is totally backwards in LA. And
Well, especially coming from Mulholland Drive down the hill, my God, I would sit there for a week. I felt like at all those stoplights. I'm like, someone say, "Hey, meet me down for coffee." I said, "I'll be there in 10 minutes." Like an hour and 10 minutes later, I'm like, "Oh my word!" But
yeah,
the beautiful part of LA,
because
though.
it'll be like 3 miles and 30 45 minutes to get there, just depending on the time, and you can never really gauge it. But yeah, it was crazy. I like went to Houston and like during a lot of COVID, and we drove because I had just gotten a new car right before COVID. So I was like, you know what, like I talked to my drummer again, like me him and I are like super close. So I was just like, hey, let's just go to Houston tomorrow. And he was like, all right, sick. So we just drove all the way to Houston because we didn't want to fly because we were sketched out about it. And also, I'm not sure. I think they were still flying, but it was still sketchy. We just drove, and like 3 or 4 hours into it, we just realized we fucked up and shouldn't have done that long ass drive. And but when we got to Houston, you know, we were gonna stay at my dad's house. Like I didn't want to get him sick or anything, just in case, you know, because they was
Right.
talking about like some people didn't really show symptoms or anything. So we got this Airbnb, and after about like 2 weeks, I was like, okay, cool. So I, like pulled up, said hey to my dad and everything, and we were just kind of chilling in Houston. But it was also just like shut down and like nothing was happening, which was also really weird because I had never seen that before, you know.
Yeah.
And Houston has a lot of traffic. In some areas, just as bad as LA, but not like everywhere. But um, yeah, it was weird. It was just super weird.
It's changed the world, right? And I'm hoping, Trevor, that it's changed it for the better now. And let's hope that, there were so many lives lost, there were so many, so much tragedy. But as I've said to a lot of people that, like I've said to you earlier, I just feel like I feel blessed. Like with my schedule generally and a lot of my work in Hollywood, that I'm out there 80% of the time. And that literally it's unheard of that I would be home more than 2 weeks ever. And I've been home for a year with my dog, which is incredible. And so I feel totally
Yeah,
blessed. And you know what? And people said, "Oh my God, well, what are you doing?" I'm like, well, we ended up, geez, we planted huge gardens at the farm last year. And I had an old tiki bar behind the barn, one of my barns. that I'd had for a party that was sort of mangled because I'm sure we had too much to drink and we broke it into